Welcome back to the deep dive. We're plunging into some really fascinating topics today, aiming to bring you those key nuggets of knowledge and insight.
Yeah, and today it's a journey, really, into the human mind. We're looking at the subtle but profound world of clinical hypnosis.
Specifically, we're diving into the work of Milton H. Erickson.
Exactly. Our insights are drawn from excerpts of Milton H. Erickson Experiencing Hypnosis, which details his work with Ernest Rossi, and also from his really foundational Ocean Monarch lecture.
Right. And our mission really is to unpack how Erickson, who was just such a pioneer, how he basically turned the field of hypnosis on its head. He would moved away from those, old school authoritarian methods. We'll explore his surprising indirect communication style, how he used things like catalepsy, that spontaneous physical stuff, and how he read those tiny ideomotor signals.
And you'll discover how he managed to work with even the most skeptical people, turning therapy into this collaborative dance, really respecting the patient's own unconscious wisdom.
Okay, so let's dig in. Erickson's work, it really represents this huge shift, doesn't it? Before him, hypnosis was often very direct, almost like giving orders.
Absolutely. And what's so fascinating is even when Erickson used words like technique or maybe control, the whole context of his work shows he meant something totally different from that traditional authoritarian way.
Right.
He was really pioneering a much more permissive and insightful kind of therapy. That Ocean Monarch lecture, for instance, it really illustrates this shift.
Okay.
A core belief for him was that, look, the conscious and unconscious minds, they're always there. Both are listening. And he found that, really profound psychotherapy could happen even in what you might call a light trance.
Really? Just a light trance.
Yeah, because the key wasn't necessarily deepness, but knowing how to talk to a patient to get results.
So what did that actually mean for the patient sitting there? How did it feel different?
Well, it meant fostering their responsiveness, not forcing it. Patients were actively encouraged, believe it or not, to feel free to respond to whatever degree they wish.
Okay.
And even, amazingly, to withhold whatever they wish. That emphasis on freedom, it sort of built this sense of confidence, this active participation.
That focus on freedom and choice, it naturally leads us to trust, doesn't it? How did he build that critical relationship, especially if he wasn't, demanding obedience?
That's a really important point about just getting started with someone. Erickson believed in establishing a good conscious rapport first, showing genuine interest in the person and their problems.
Makes sense.
He'd often ask their permission to use hypnosis, but frame it in the way that is most helpful to them.
Ah, okay.
And to subtly build trust. Sometimes he'd ask a patient in trance a question he knew they should not yet answer.
Okay.
But then immediately, before they could even really process or respond, he'd point out, oh, that's a question not yet to be answered. So it taught them, unconsciously, that, yeah, they were free to respond, but they were under no compulsions to answer a question before the right time comes. And he'd make that clear, both awake and in trance.
Wow. So giving them permission not to answer actually built trust. That's brilliant, really counterintuitive. Now, this gets really interesting. Erickson talked about hypnosis letting you manipulate, maybe utilize is a better word, the personality in its different ways of functioning. And this includes that fascinating concept, dissociation.
Yeah, dissociation. If you connect it to the bigger picture, it's basically the mind's natural ability to separate different bits of an experience.
Okay.
Erickson could, for example, split off the emotional part of a traumatic memory from the intellectual facts of it.
How would that work?
Well, he famously demonstrated it by having someone recover all the merriment of a joke without knowing what the joke was. So the person starts laughing heartily, wondering what's funny, and only later remembers the actual joke. He could do this with trauma, too, like in a jigsaw fashion. Let a patient recover, say, a little bit of the intellectual content, then a little bit of the emotional content, and they need not necessarily be connected right away.
I see.
This way, you could eventually recover deeply forgotten things, like a childhood pitchfork injury he mentioned, by working on the pieces separately when they were manageable.
So you could feel the raw emotion without the memory, or recall the facts without being overwhelmed by the feeling until you were actually ready to put them together. That feels like a real aha moment for managing distress.
Exactly. And it also opened up the possibility of helping someone fully remember a trauma and then inducing amnesia for it.
Whoa.
Yeah, letting the therapist control the reintroduction of that memory when the patient was stronger. The patient sort of unknowingly handed over control of those traumatic experiences to the therapist for safekeeping, essentially.
Okay, but what about resistance? Patients often come in with, deep-seated resistance. Maybe they're neurotic or emotionally disturbed or just plain fearful. How did Erickson handle that, especially those who just could not talk or were, like, exceedingly antagonistic?
This is where his utilization approach really shone. He'd often kind of center the patient's resistance on himself
Okay.
and then subtly remove himself or bring in something else to bypass it.
Yeah.
He actually said you should be grateful for that resistance.
Grateful.
Yeah, because it's energy you can work with. Take the Elsa technique.
Hmm.
This exceedingly antagonistic doctor, absolutely dead set against going into trance, comes to Erickson.
Right.
So Erickson brings in Elsa, a psychology student already in deep trance, and tells her to put the doctor in a trance. Then Erickson just totally walked out of the room.
He just left.
Yep. By making himself the focus of the doctor's resistance and then leaving, Erickson basically carried that whole load of resistance out with him. It's, one thing to resist me, but how can you really resist someone who is in a trance, whose one and only purpose is to put you in a trance?
That's incredibly clever. What about that surprise handshake you mentioned?
Another classic example. Yeah. A doctor flies 2,000 miles to be hypnotized, but then resists Erickson for 2 solid hours, consciously thinking he's cooperating the whole time.
Okay.
Finally, Erickson says, basically, okay, I've failed, but offers to introduce the doctor to his wife before he leaves. As they go to shake hands goodbye, Erickson very graciously put out his hand, and I lifted it slowly, induced a deep hypnotic trance.
Just like that, during the goodbye handshake?
Just like that. The doctor had no defenses, no guard, no way of protecting himself, because the session was over. He was just saying goodbye.
So he used the social ritual, the letting down of the guard, to create the opening.
Exactly. Erickson's whole philosophy was, whatever the patient presents to you in the office, you really ought to use. If someone's tapping their foot, you time your suggestions to the rhythm.
Right.
Maybe suggest they shift feet just as they're about to anyway. If they laugh at your technique, encourage the laugh, then maybe say something like, you will probably find this next suggestion very funny. But then again, I may be mistaken, and you may not find it funny at all.
Covering all the bases.
Right. So whether they laugh or don't laugh to prove you wrong, they're actually following your suggestion by demonstrating the response. Even if they cursed him out, he'd accept it, maybe even amplify it slightly, meeting them on their own level.
Yeah.
He used the resistance. He didn't fight it.
So the message was basically, bring your resistance. Thank you. I can work with that.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay. Building on that utilization, indirect suggestion, you mentioned this incredible case, Harvey, the sad sack. This sounds like a powerful story.
Oh, it's a fantastic example of using depersonalization and projection for therapy. So Harvey, he had like every known ache and pain, every known sense of inferiority. Intelligent guy, but deeply fearful.
Okay.
Erickson suggests Harvey see his self on a kind of movie screen, teaches him to forget his name, his identity, to forget everything about himself. Harvey becomes just an intelligence that was looking at all those things on the screen.
Just an observer.
Exactly. And he watches this series of events. A little boy brutally punished for using his left hand, later seeing a deputy shoot his dog. He sees this thread, rejection, loss, inferiority repeating through the boy's life. Heartbreak, divorce, losing jobs.
Wow.
Then Erickson asked Harvey, the intellect, to review these pictures, discuss the thread of continuity and the repetition of traumatic experiences.
And the key here, the absolute key, is Harvey didn't consciously connect this story to himself.
Not at all. He's analyzing that young man, even concluding he'll probably end up committing suicide, always on the losing end. Then Erickson gives this tiny post-hypnotic suggestion. Harvey should just practice writing clearly, not his usual self-humiliating scrawl.
Just practice writing.
Yeah. Harvey wakes up, writes, "This is a beautiful day in March," nice and clear, and then just jumped to his feet and said, "I can write clearly. I can write legibly." He demanded that everyone praise his writing.
He got excited about writing clearly.
Immensely. He held on to that sense of accomplishment, that sense of personal pride, and just ran with it in every essential way. The very next day, this guy who had a fifth-rate job where his boss kicked him around, he talked back to his boss for the first time, and he demanded an increase. And he got it.
No way.
Yes. Confronted a guy who always blocked his car, repainted his own car, got new slipcovers, started eating at a better place, moved to a better rooming house. Just total turnaround.
All sparked by the simple act of writing legibly and feeling that pride. That's a huge aha moment about how unconscious change can ripple outwards.
Exactly. That surge of joy over the simple matter of writing his name legibly and giving him permission to feel that tremendous boyish surge of jubilant joy was enough to carry him along. It's a perfect example of indirect trance learning.
Okay.
The therapist loosens the inhibiting influence of the patient's rigid conscious mind, and that frees up the creative unconscious to make changes in its own way
Yeah.
in areas that are right for the patient then.
Amazing. Okay, let's shift gears a bit to another core phenomenon in Erickson's work, catalepsy. We hear it described as, like, immobility or stiffness. What exactly is it?
Yeah, simply put, catalepsy is when voluntary movement gets suspended. Your limbs or even your whole body can just stay in a fixed position, even an awkward one, without you trying. Historically, it was seen as one of the earliest defining signs of trance.
Right. Like, way back.
Way back, Esdale, in the 1850s in India, used mesmeric passes, basically hand movements, to induce catalepsy for surgical anesthesia. He'd know it worked if the patient's arms just stayed wherever he put them.
Wow, for surgery.
Yeah. Then Charcot, in the 1880s, he described the cataleptic state as a key stage of hypnosis. Could be brought on by loud noises, bright lights, just fixing your eyes on something. He described people as motionless and, as it were, fascinated. Eyes open, gaze fixed, limbs holding positions, and crucially, he noted, complete insensibility to pain.
So for a long time, the view was very much passive rigidity, maybe caused by the hypnotist's power.
That was the prevailing idea, yeah. But the modern view, which Erickson really shaped, is quite different. It sees catalepsy less as passive and more as a sign of an active, accepting and receptive attitude from the patient.
Okay.
How easily someone can comfortably hold a limb in place is seen as a measure of their sensitivity and receptivity to suggestion.
So it's actually a sign of their subtle, maybe unconscious cooperation, not just them being limp or controlled.
Precisely. Erickson used catalepsy to secure a patient's attention, to focus that attention inward, and to arouse an attitude of wondering or expectancy for further suggestion. It was an invitation inward.
Where might we see this kind of thing in everyday life? You mentioned the common everyday trance.
Right. Erickson coined that term for these spontaneous moments. Think about it. People gazing off, that far away or blank look, eyes fixed, face kind of loses animation. That's a form of catalepsy.
Huh.
Or when you're totally absorbed in a book, lecture, or movie, you might stay pretty much immobile, cataleptic, right? Even if someone nudges your arm, you might not consciously register moving it.
Yeah, I can picture that.
Or think of a crowd at a game, that critical moment where everyone leans forward and just hangs there, suspended. That's a collective catalepsy. Or when you stop mid-task, maybe writing or sawing, just frozen for a moment while you think about something absorbing.
That makes so much sense. We all do that without thinking, oh, I'm in a mini trance.
Exactly. And this body immobility, it's also linked to intense inner mental stuff, like dreaming, especially REM sleep. So just like dreaming shows heightened vigilance during sleep, catalepsy when you're awake is like a state of heightened expectancy.
Okay, so if Erickson wasn't about forcing it, how did he gently guide patients into this state?
It was really an art form, using minimal, gentle, often nonverbal cues. He totally avoided forceful actions. He believed hypnosis is mainly about increased responsiveness to ideas, and you elicit that by having the patient participate.
So like subtle nudges.
Very subtle.
Yeah.
Like for hand levitation, he'd touch the arm purposely in a
Okay.
very, very gentle fashion, so that there's just a suggestion that I'm lifting the arm. The gentler the touch, the better. Maybe an irregular, uncertain, changing pattern of tactile stimulation with his fingertips on the wrist, just enough to draw attention there.
And the goal.
The goal was to direct the patient's attention there in his hand, and the development of that state of balanced muscle tonicity, which is catalepsy. And once you get it in one limb, he noted, there's a good possibility there will be catalepsy throughout the body, which can then lessen awareness of fatigue or pain because attention is shifted.
What about tricky situations? You mentioned a blind subject, Dr. Z.
Right, that was a challenge, because for a blind person, a touch means do something. It has a clear purpose. So achieving catalepsy without an obvious conscious purpose was much harder. Dr. Z's hand kept dropping despite his subtle cues.
So it didn't work.
Well, Erickson noted that catalepsy in a sighted person who does not understand a word you say is easily achieved. But interestingly, the source material points out that Dr. Z's inability to follow Erickson's direct commands to keep her arm up actually indicates that she is in an altered state of consciousness.
Wait, her failure to obey showed she was entranced.
Kind of, yeah. Her difficulty following the direct command, plus the fact she completely ignored loud barking dogs outside, were seen as signs she was already operating differently, already in a trance state.
That's fascinating. Resistance as confirmation.
It is. And another common technique was the magnetic hands induction. You ask the person to hold their hands facing each other, maybe 8 inches apart. Then you suggest a magnetic force pulling them together or pushing them apart.
Okay.
This sort of binds the subject's consciousness to the induction process and arouses expectation. Then you might say, don't let those hands move. Paradoxically, the therapist takes over the resistance, leaving the person just with the expectation of movement, which then often happens.
Clever. Okay, let's pivot to another key tool. Ideomotor signaling. What exactly are we talking about here?
Ideomotor signals are basically tiny, involuntary physical movements linked directly to a thought or an image, often happening completely outside your conscious awareness.
Involuntary movements.
Yeah. Historically, people called them automatisms, sometimes thought they were mysterious, even magical. But Erickson just saw them as interesting manifestations of response systems outside the usual range of awareness.
Okay.
And these little responses, they're actually seen as the fundamental building blocks that led to all those classic trance phenomena back in the 19th century. Erickson got really good at spotting them by observing animals, students, people, and experiments.
So these aren't just clinical things. Do our bodies do this all the time?
Oh, absolutely. Everyday life is just rich in many forms of ideomotor signaling, mostly unconscious.
Like what?
Well, think about unconscious head nods and shakes. Maybe you've seen someone talking to themselves while shaving, nodding, and shaking, or a salesperson watching a customer for that tiny unconscious nod that means keep going, or the slight shake that means change tactics fast. Politicians apparently often take questions only from people they see nodding along. And think back to school. Raising your hand becomes this automatic yes or I want to speak signal. As we get older, they just get more abbreviated and automatic. Little head lifts, wetting lips, leaning forward slightly, focusing your gaze when you're about to say something.
It's like a constant, subtle, unspoken language our bodies are speaking, even when we don't realize it.
That's a great way to put it. And Erickson believed that for these signals to be truly autonomous, truly unconscious, it helped if the patient was in trance, or at least distracted enough not to consciously watch their own body. He'd look for those slow, slight, but persistent head movements, less likely to be deliberate.
And how are these used in therapy, finger signals?
Yeah, clinicians like Lacron develop systems where, say, one finger moving means yes, another no, maybe another I don't know, or I don't want to answer, all coming from the unconscious. You could even get these in a waking state, maybe using a little pendulum. The first movements are often slow, hesitant, maybe a little shaky, which suggests they're genuinely autonomous. And sometimes other fingers might move, maybe, perhaps, or maybe, or that the question wasn't clear. Erickson said, explore those. They often show genuinely autonomous aspects of ideomotor signaling.
So people might find this happening outside therapy, too.
Sometimes, yeah. Patients reported it happening during daydreaming, reading, driving those common everyday trance states we talked about.
So it seems like a direct line to the unconscious. But how reliable is it? How useful?
Well, the source says its validity really depends on the therapist's capacity to understand the situation. But it can be incredibly revealing, sometimes contradicting what the patient is saying consciously.
Like uncovering repressed stuff.
Exactly. There's a compelling example. A patient freely talking about 7 affairs, consciously, totally open. But in trance, using finger signals, her hand signaled no when asked about the timing of the first affair. It revealed it happened much earlier, at puberty, tied up with guilt and repression, and she'd forgotten another affair entirely.
And she had no idea her hand was saying this.
Completely unaware of the movements contradicting her conscious story. That information was repressed from consciousness and only came out through the ideomotor signals.
Wow. So it's not just about getting information, it's also about facilitating change.
Absolutely. It gives you a framework. The test operate test exit, or TOTI model, uses this. You ask the unconscious test questions.
Right.
Like, is there a psychological or emotional reason for your problem? The patient does an inner review on an ideomotor level, maybe conscious, maybe not, and gives a yes or no signal.
Okay.
If it's no or I don't know, you need to ask differently or dig deeper. But the really fascinating part is sometimes problems could get resolved at an ideomotor or unconscious level without either patient or therapist knowing the what, how, or why of it.
Seriously, the problem just gets solved unconsciously.
Yeah, especially facing it consciously is still too painful. It opens up this fascinating prospect of unconscious problem solving.
That's mind-bending. The unconscious just fixes things?
It seems it can, yeah.
Okay, Erickson often worked with really smart, skeptical people, right? Like Dr. Q, the psychiatrist mentioned in the source. How did he even approach them, given they'd probably be full of doubts?
His core belief was simple. The best way to learn trance is by experiencing it, so he'd meet them at that level. He'd phrase suggestions really carefully in ways that would kind of sneak past their conscious analysis and appeal directly to the unconscious.
So, not trying to convince their skeptical conscious mind.
Not directly, no. And for Erickson, remember, trance wasn't always some dramatic deep state. He defined it broadly as just a state or period of intense inner absorption. It could be both deep and light at the same time.
Deep and light. How?
Deep enough that you're so absorbed you don't notice traffic noise, maybe, but light enough that the therapist's voice comes through easily. For skeptics who'd balk at words like sleep or automatic, he'd validate the trance by asking about any minimal alterations of their usual everyday mode of experiencing.
So just tiny shifts.
Yeah. He'd accept any unusual pattern of subjective experience or responsiveness as an indication of at least the beginning stages of learning to experience trance.
So it's not about hitting some big hypnotized benchmark, but noticing these subtle internal shifts they might not even label as trance themselves.
Exactly that.
So how did he start guiding someone like Dr. Q, the skeptic, into that altered state without using direct commands?
He used what the source calls intriguing questions and truisms. Things that gently yo-yo consciousness, pull attention away from outside reality and into an inner search, without explicitly saying, go inside.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Talking to Dr. Q, who he'd just met, Erickson might say something like, you can let your mind wander because I'm going to mention something that happened when you first went to school. When you went to school, you were confronted with the problem of letters and numerals. To you at that time, learning the letter A seemed impossible.
Yeah.
And how did you tell a B from a P?
Things everyone experienced but have to search their own memory for.
Exactly. They're intriguing, universally true in a sense, but they force that personal internal search.
And this yo-yoing is key to inducing trance.
Yes, it's an indirect way to secure attention and initiate that intense focus of inner search and automatic unconscious processes. Another technique was structured amnesia.
Structured amnesia.
Yeah. He might repeat a phrase from earlier in the session, maybe about forming mental images much later on. This creates a kind of lacuna, a gap in conscious memory for everything that happened in between.
So you forget the middle part.
Right. Significant stuff can fall into a lacuna and become amnesic. Erickson liked this because the more of my communications that are in her unconscious, the better she will be as a hypnotic subject. Mm. It often happens when the conscious mind is momentarily startled and doesn't know why, letting the unconscious fill things in.
Okay. One of the most fascinating bits, especially with skeptics, is this illusory choice idea in trance. What was that about?
Erickson believed he could create a feeling of choice even though I'm determining it. Dr. Q, for example, felt he had free will during the session, even while his arm was moving totally autonomously in catalepsy.
He felt like he was choosing, but his arm was doing its own thing.
Pretty much. Dr. Q said, I wanted to test it, see how much choice I had. I was afraid to test it too much then. I just decided, well, let it go. At one point, I wanted his arm to go this way, but it wanted to go that way, and I could feel that. He was absolutely fascinated by his hand acting all by itself.
Wow.
He called it, a state of being, and said it was very hard to accept as existing even in spite of seeing it. Erickson basically said Dr. Q's hand was completely out of his conscious ego control.
So the conscious mind thinks it's choosing, or at least observing choice, while the unconscious is already responding to subtle cues.
That's the idea. And this fascination with autonomous behavior is crucial for skeptics. It helps them break out of the limiting conceptions of their rational mind. It really hits that core question. How can consciousness watch and have some control, yet also allow more room for these autonomous, creative, unconscious processes when needed?
Right. So how did Erickson know for sure someone was in trance, especially a light one, if he wasn't asking, are you hypnotized?
He hardly ever asked directly. He used subtle cues and questions to ratify it, confirm it, often mainly for the unconscious mind's benefit, letting the conscious mind catch up later.
Like what kind of cues?
Time distortion was a big one. He'd often ask how long people thought they'd been in trance. Dr. Q might guess 3 or 4 minutes, or maybe 15 or 20, when it had actually been over 10 minutes, or about 50 minutes.
Ah, the classic time warp.
Exactly. Ruth, another subject, was amazed her few minutes was really 50. That difference really helps ratify trance due to the time distortion. He also used clever double binds.
Double binds.
Like asking Dr. Q, Do you know if you were in a trance? The source points out whether the answer is yes or no, it admits a trance. If he says no, he means no, I didn't know I was in a trance, which still acknowledges he was in one.
Huh. That's brilliant. Catches the skeptical mind.
Right. It depotentiates the limitations of his doubting mind, because any answer confirms it. And amnesia, of course, forgetting things that happened during trance, was a strong sign. He'd intentionally structure it, like we discussed.
And physical signs.
Oh, yeah, subtle things. A flatter facial expression, the body being very still and quiet, maybe dilated pupils, changes in blinking or swallowing, and then that typical stretching and looking around when they woke up. Even Dr. Q, noticing he felt my muscles try to carry out the suggestion, even if he felt he failed, that focus on his muscles was unusual, indicating an altered state.
So what really made Erickson so incredibly skilled? Was it just the collection of techniques or something?
More. It seems it was largely his uncanny ability to recognize the appropriate moment, when to start an induction, when to suggest a phenomenon, and how to just use whatever the patient was already doing. He was also apparently very modest about his own reputation.
Modest.
Yeah, he understood that it is the patient who needs to give the therapist prestige, often out of a desperate hope that something can be done. He'd accept that prestige, but indirectly, by staying humble himself.
Oh, yeah.
He used this great analogy for timing. When do you kiss a pretty girl? The answer, when she is ready, not when you are ready. He'd indirectly plant an idea, maybe just thoughtfully looking at some mistletoe near the girl. The goal was for her to start thinking, gee, I want a kiss, not he wants a kiss. That, the source says, is a paradigm of all hypnotic work, knowing what the frames of reference can be and how to facilitate them.
So it wasn't about imposing his will at all. It was about creating the conditions for the patient's own unconscious to step up and make the change.
Precisely. Observing their natural body immobility or frozen moments as cues for catalepsy.
Whoa.
Not telling them what to do, but setting up a situation in which his patterns can come forth, and then subtly reinforcing the new learnings. That's the heart of his modern experiential approach.
Wow. Okay, so today we've really gone deep into Milton H. Erickson's world of indirect hypnosis. We've looked at how he totally changed the game, moving from commands to collaboration, really tapping into the unconscious. We saw how gentle touch could invite catalepsy, how tiny everyday movements are actually ideomotor signals, and how even total skeptics like Dr. Q could experience these altered states through indirect suggestion and really clever interactions.
Yeah, thinking about the illusory choice, Harvey's incredible transformation, Dr. Q watching his own hand move.
Right. It really highlights how our unconscious can do amazing things when it's given the right nudge.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, Erickson's work really underscores that our minds can do far more than our conscious selves usually give them credit for.
Yeah.
It kind of challenges what the source calls the modern mind's dangerous hubris, this idea that consciousness is everything, that it cannot be split, dissociated.
Okay.
Erickson shows us that those everyday creative moments, daydreaming, getting lost in thought, meditating, that sudden flash of insight, those are themselves altered states.
Right.
There are times when our usual ways of thinking get suspended for a bit, allowing new ideas, self-discovery, healing to pop up, often feeling a bit strange or unnatural at the time.
So what really stands out to you from all this? For me, maybe it's that the real magic Erickson showed us isn't about control or tricks. It's about understanding and working with the mind's incredible built-in ability to heal and change itself, often in ways we aren't even consciously aware of.
Yeah, and that really raises a question for all of us, doesn't it? In a world that's always pushing us to be aware, to be in control, what could you gain if you occasionally let your usual conscious ways of thinking be depotentiated, just bypassed for a bit? What if you let your own unconscious surprise you with what it can do, with its own natural creativity?
Something definitely worth pondering. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and maybe keep an eye out for those fascinating, subtle cues happening inside your own amazing mind.